Hi everybody, welcome back to Winning with Sketchup. Adam here with you once again. And today we're going to take a look at how to do a weld operation in SketchUp using Vertex Tools. And we're going to look at why this is beneficial and some different ways that this can help us out. So what I've done is import here a hatch pattern that I noticed was particularly bad with a lot of gaps. And I got this out of Autocad, and I created a hatch over in Autocad. The hatch itself, if you're curious, is coming from belgard.com, and you can grab this hatch if you wanted to follow along by going into the pavers and going down and choosing any one of these pavers here. And what we want to do is once you choose the paver, you go down to resources here, and you want to download this zip file for AutoCAD or AutoCAD Lite, and you go ahead and unzip that, and I believe it's an MSI file that you install, and it will go ahead and automatically load those hatch patterns into AutoCAD for you. So I was using these for a job and noticed that this particular hatch pattern had a lot of small gaps in it, and they're not as readily noticeable over here in AutoCAD, but you can really see them or deal with the headache of them over in SketchUp when you go to create faces and close each one of these lines to create geometry. So there is a way to do this directly in AutoCAD. I believe you can use some auto constraints and things like that to help close these, but for demonstration we're going to bring this over into SketchUp here, and I just again saved that over out of AutoCAD as a DWG and then imported this via SketchUp Pro as a DWG. So we have this here. I'm going to change my style over to construction document style, just make it a little easier on the eyes. And what I'm going to do here is, this is in a group, I want to open up the group, and just by double clicking on one of these edges, and I'm going to use a plugin from TomTom called Edge Tools, and I'm going to use this to inspect all of the gaps in this DWG here that we've imported. Now if you look at it in SketchUp, SketchUp does a really good job of rendering these lines, and they look nice and smooth. There's good anti-aliasing going on, and it kind of makes it hard to tell with this style. Now if we go back to one of the default styles like architectural design, what that will do is put a thicker weight line everywhere that there is a vertice or a vertex. Singularly you call it a vertex, in multiple you call it vertices. So everywhere that the line isn't straight, so there's a segment here, you'll see this little tag or this little thicker line weight, and that will represent that. But what it doesn't show you, and none of the styles have the ability to show you where the gaps are within this. So if I would go ahead now and try to create faces out of this geometry here. Now there's a couple different plugins to generate faces, and you can go looking for those in the plugin store. The one I like that's there is Make Face, and this is from S4U is the name of the plugin author. So if you go and search that in the plugin warehouse, or the extension warehouse as it's called, you'll be able to find this. Now we'll run this and it'll go through, and you can see we have 3,503 edges, just a little over 3,500, and we'll run this, and if we look down here, it'll go through and try to create faces, and it was able to create a face from the border geometry because there's no gaps in the border. But this is just none of these internal faces are closed at all. So we can see if we click here, just one giant face. Now if I wanted to go and use this as let's say some type of a walkway or wall, as a stone hatch even, this wouldn't work. I would need to close all of these, and that way I can go ahead and texture these. I can texture the mortar joint in the middle, and even do some things like 2D Boolean operations. I would need all of this to be tidied up and closed. So we're going to delete that face that the plugin created, and we're going to use Edge Tools here that I mentioned, and we're going to run the Inspect and Close Edge Gaps tool. So if I click on that, we can see, let me move this over a little bit, and right here we can see open ends, 6,563 open ends. So the way Inspect and Close Edge Gaps works is it will inspect and find all of these edge gaps, and it will try to do some automatic correction. And you get a little tooltip here that says closest open vertex. So every single one of these segments are not welded coming out of Autocad. And like I said, we could have done that and fixed some of that over in Autocad, but I wanted to do this as an example here. And this is probably the worst example that you'll see. Best example, but worst as far as the amount of edge gaps here in such a small little section. So this will be a really good piece for demonstration. So we can see we have 6,563, and I'm just going to show you what would happen if we would try to use Edge Tools, and that would really mean going around and clicking 6,563 times to try to fix each one of these. And it becomes a real pain as you're trying to zoom in and out because you have no face. You have to have your cursor directly on that edge in order to zoom in. And I'm going to try to get close enough here. Apologize, I don't have my 3D mouse hooked up here, but you can see the edge gap here. Hopefully the record's picking it up. But if I would go ahead and click on Edge Tools here and use the built-in solver, you can see that it'll go ahead and close this edge gap for us. And what I need to do is make sure that you can see my distance over here is set to 1/2 inch. So if I would measure this, you can see that that's a 1-inch gap. So it's out of range for me to repair that. So I would need to bump up my distance over here, and let's say I go to 1.5, and then I would click on this. It would go ahead and close that for me. But we can see what happens is it created an extra edge. So we're actually creating more geometry here, and we really don't want to do that, especially on a hatch pattern like this. We want it to be as optimized as possible. So we're kind of going the opposite way, and we're not optimizing this at all. We're actually creating more edges, and overall it just slows things down. So it's not really a good option to go and use Edge Tools on a situation like this, or at least the Inspect and Close Edge Gaps. Now there is another tool here, which is this one. It's called Close All Edge Gaps, and it allows you to go through, and instead of doing the manual way as the first option does, this one will do it automatically. So let me go and find an edge gap. Here's some pretty noticeable ones. So I'll select these edges here, and we'll run this, and it'll bring up a tolerance very similar to our distance over here in the manual method. And we hit OK, and we can see what it'll do is go through and close these. I think these are a little bigger than our tolerance here. So I think I'm pretty far out of scale here with this overall, but that's okay. So you can see it's showing about 10 inches. So I'll do this again, and I'll set this to 12, just a little bit above that. Say OK, and we can see it does the same thing. It goes and adds extra edges in there, little pieces of geometry. So let's zoom out here, and I'm going to close the group and select the group. I'm going to scale this down here to 0.1 or so. and we can see that's still really large here, so scale that down again. I'll go 0.1 again, and zoom extents, and that looks a little more reasonable. There we go. So that's about the size that I would want for this. Now let's get rid of our character there, and I'm going to go back to the construction documentation style, which is typically what I work in here. Get inside of this group, and let's just refresh our memory here. We have, again, 6,559, and we did make a few little adjustments there, but we need to close all of these edge gaps before we can generate faces here. So in order to do that, we're going to use Vertex Tools. And Vertex Tools gives us an option which is, if you're familiar with other 3D software, very similar to a weld command. So it brings kind of the ability to weld within SketchUp. So let's call Vertex Tools, and I have that set to a keyboard shortcut. And I'm going to bring that up, and we can see here's the Vertex Tools icon. If you don't have Vertex Tools, and you're a big SketchUp user, I would highly recommend that be, if you haven't purchased any commercial plugins, this one is a must-have as far as the things that it can do. And just for the welding alone, it really comes in handy, especially in situations like this. So now what we're going to do with Vertex Tools is, as soon as you call Vertex Tools, it will put a mark at each one of these endpoints. So again, endpoints, vertex, vertices, they're all the same thing. So what we want to do this weld operation is we want to select all of these. Now you can go and drag select, you can right click and go to select all, or you could also drag select everything depending on what you're working on. And now we want to right click and we want to go and use the option down here, merge close vertices, and you have two options. You have merge vertices, which will, let me zoom in here and find a noticeable edge gap, and here's one here. We have some clipping here. So if I would drag select those two vertices there, those two endpoints, right click, go to merge vertices, we can see that it welded those together without creating an extra edge. So you're keeping the same edge count overall. Now let me undo that. If I would select more than one set here and go to merge vertices, we can see that it'll pull everything together and weld all of those to a central spot. So it kind of finds the midway point between all of those and welds that there. So you would need to go through and select each one at a time, and depending on what you're working on, it can be really handy. I have a keyboard shortcut set up for merge vertices, so I can go through and just do it very quickly. But if you wanted to do multiple sets at the same time, you would use this option, the merge close vertices. So we would set our distance here, and let's kind of get a little measurement. See, that's a 1/16 of an inch, so it's pretty small. And we call Vertex Tools again, grab both of those, merge close vertices. They're both within the range here of a 1/2 inch, and say OK. And we can see now that both of those sets of 4 vertices have now been welded into 2. And let's look up here at the reading. We can see we have 2 now. So essentially what we're going to do is do that to the entire area at the same time. And Vertex Tools does a really good job, and it's really fast, and surprisingly fast compared to say going through and trying to do something like close all edge gaps, or to run some of the other plugins that do CAD cleanup. So let's right click, go to merge close vertices. We're going to leave it at a 1/2 inch. It might not get all of them, but we'll go through. This will be our first pass here at a 1/2 inch. So we can see we have 6,812 vertices selected. We'll say OK. and that'll go through and process. And I'm not going to pause the video, I'll just let this go through so we can see how fast it's already done. And now we're showing 3,389. And let's go back to Edge Tools and run the inspector again. And sure enough, it got all of them with that tolerance set to 1/2 inch. There's one little guy down here, and that's not an open vertice or vertex. That is just what they call stray edge. So whenever you have stray edges, you can use this option here in Edge Tools, which is Erase Stray Curves, and this will only operate on an area that's selected. So you want to be careful if you're using this while you're working, that if you don't have anything selected, it's going to work on the whole model. So just be mindful of that. But I know we have this stray edge down here. We can look at our edge count up in the entity info, and I'll go ahead and run erase, and you can see it erased that one stray curve. We lost an edge in our edge count up here. We can run inspector again, and this is the number we're looking for, 0. So we have 0 open edges now. And just like that, the Vertex Tools went through and welded all of those edge gaps, which was really over 3,000 of them, very, very quickly. And now what we can do is run the Make Face tool, and we'll go ahead and run that, and you'll see that it'll process down here out of these 3,449. That quickly it went through and did a really, really superb job in closing all of these. And a shape like this, a good way to make sure that everything's closed is to just select the what they would call the joint in the center of the stone pattern here. And you can see that the dotted hatch here, or dancing ants as some people call them, the selection indication is not bleeding into any of the stones. So that's what you want to look for. You just want to make sure that dotted hatch that represents the selection isn't bleeding into any of these stones, and that's how you know everything is closed. And let's get in here, let's reverse the faces, and now we can see we actually have faces, which will allow us to put textures, things like that. We could push-pull. You can see you can push-pull that joint there in the center, and now you actually have some 3D geometry out of the hatch pattern from AutoCAD. And opens up some other options. We can get in here and texture this now. And just as a bonus, I'll show you some quick ways to texture something like this. And I'm just going to use standard colors, but you can do the same thing with a tileable texture here and have a few different tileable textures. So I'm just going to use maybe these shades of gray, and I'm going to grab those. I have through paint activated. I'll just go back to the standard SketchUp paint bucket, and again, you want to make sure you're inside the group and actually can select these faces here. See, if I click out of the group and I would paint here, it would paint everything, so we don't want to do that. To make sure we're inside the group, undo that. There we are. As long as we can select those faces, we can paint them. And let's get in here, and we just want to paint maybe 4 of these. And let's grab the really light color here, and we can paint the center. Yeah, we can see we have that painted there, and that will be our, let's say, mortar or cement in the middle of the stones. So now what we want to do is we want to select everything, and I'm going to get in here. Let's just do Control A since it's the only thing in the model here, and I'm going to hold Control and Shift and deselect the joint. So now we just have the stones selected. 4 of them are painted, and we're going to use a plugin from Chris Fulmer called Extrapolate Colors, and we'll run that, and what that'll do is randomize those 4 initial colors over the selection. So see that, And we can go through and you can tweak things if you see too many colors together that look the same, and try to randomize those, excuse me. And there we go. Now we have our hatch pattern all cleaned up, welded, and now we're able to add materials. And one other bonus thing that I'll show you real quick is using the 2D Boolean tool, and that's a plugin that you can download as well from the extension warehouse. And what this will do is allow you to cut out this shape to fit any type of, say, patio, walkway, wall, anything along those lines. So if you had the known shape that you wanted to use, and I'm just going to quickly draw a shape here, and let me do a square, and let me move that down here. Let's do this midpoint to this midpoint, erase the center, reverse those faces. Now if we move this on top here, we want our shape to be not grouped, so ungrouped, something like this, and our hatch here, which we've cleaned up, welded, and textured, to be grouped. So what we'll do is we'll select our face, we'll select our hatch, and with 2D Boolean we can just run the trim option, and that'll trim that down to the shape that we want. So let's do this one more time, and I'm just going to draw out, let's say, a little curved walkway here, and let me do 2 arc tools, opposing, tangent arcs, offset them, close the ends, and reverse those faces. And I'll pull this up here, and it's a little bigger than our shapes. Let me just, our hatch here, let me just scale that up, move that over, and you can scale the hatch into place. So depending on what if it was more of like a brick or something, you'd want to make sure that your bond row kind of ends where you want it to end. But let's just say something like this. You can have that in there, right click, or hold Control left click and select both. We can drag select everything at the same time, that would work too. Just go to trim from 2D Boolean, and there we go. We have a good say irregular flagstone walkway is what this would be termed as. And we can go through here now, and if we wanted to raise all of these stones and keep the texture on them, what you would want to do, if you pull down the joint, you can see that the material that we applied to the joint is making up the edges of the stones. That's not going to work well. We would need to lift the stones themselves up. So you can do that manually, go through and lift all the stones, or the best way to do this is just select everything, deselect our joint, and you want to use joint push pull, and either joint push pull or this normal push pull both work really well for something like this. We can lift this up and let that go through, and that'll go through and generate all the geometry, and you can see that we have the texture is applied to the edges here as well. So, and then we can adjust our joint, maybe make it a little less, a little more shallow there, and we can see we have a really nice 3D stone walkway. So that will pick up really well in a render engine, and as far as casting shadow or doing lighting across this, you'll get a lot better. Look to that in rendering. You could take it a step further if you wanted and even chamfer these edges. You could use something like round corner from Frito 6 and set the value really low, let's say 1/8 of an inch or so, and go ahead, and you can see now we have a nice little chamfer there. Turn on hidden geometry, you can see what that looks like. So that'll catch, you can do a round corner as well. Chamfer usually works good enough to catch some specular highlights on here if you put a little bit of reflectivity on the stone in a render engine. So that's it for today. I hope that was helpful. We learned how to use Vertex Tools as a weld tool. We learned how to bring hatch patterns over into SketchUp from Autocad. One thing you should know with a hatch pattern over in Autocad is you do need to explode that down. So you want to, once you apply your hatch to your shape, you want to select the hatch and type explode into the command line and make sure that's exploded before you save that as a DWG to bring into SketchUp. So we learned how to close all of these faces. We learned how to use edge tools with the inspector, and we learned make faces from S4U, and then how to do texturing using Extrapolate Colors from Chris Fulmer, and how to cut out the shapes using 2D Boolean, and finally how to take our hatch pattern into 3D using Frito 6's joint push pull, and then how to add a little bit of relief for chamfering to that using round corner, which is also from Frito 6. So everybody have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Happy sketching.